Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and today we're visiting with both Barbara, Rainey, and Susan Yates, author of Barbara and Susan's Guide to the Empty Nest, Discovering New Purpose, Passion, and Your Next Great Adventure. Barbara and Susan, welcome to the program.
Oh, thanks for having us. We're glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Well, you're very welcome. So here you two are. One of you is in Virginia, and the other one's in Little Rock, Arkansas. And you two have collaborated on a book. Barbara, you and your husband are founders of the Cru ministry Family Life, which is formerly known as Campus Crusade for Christ. Family Life, and host Weekend to Remember conferences around the world. They've authored more than 24 books, including the best-selling Moments Together for Couples. The Raineys have been married for more than 40 years and live near Little Rock, Arkansas. And Susan, you are the author of several books and a recent guest on Family Life Today and other national radio programs. You and your husband John are popular speakers at marriage and parenting conferences and live in Virginia. So you come from two different cities. When did you first meet?
Well, we first met years ago, actually, when Dennis and Barbara were just beginning to date. And my husband and I, John, and had just been married a couple years, and we were both involved with Cru ministry. And that was the beginning of a friendship. And then for the past 20 years, John and I have spoken at the Family Life Weekend to Remember marriage conferences, which Dennis and Barbara began.
So that was your connection point. What was what caused you to hit it off? You know, this is something that's now endured over 20 years. It's brought you to the point where the friendship was so solid and you were so connected that you could actually co-author a book together from across the country.
Yeah, Susan and I have a lot in common. I think that's part of what has contributed to our friendship. Susan has 5 children and I have 6. And they're not exactly the same ages, but they're close. And so we had a lot in common, as moms often do, when they get together and talk about their kids, what their kids are going through, what we're struggling with as moms, and we would share stories with one another. But we also have a lot in common on our faith. We have a very similar faith journey. We have the same values in a lot of ways. And so it was very easy to be friends because we had so much in common. And the whole story of us writing the book began quite a while ago. Susan's about 4 years ahead of me in the parenting journey. And so when my youngest went off to college, I was a little bit lost. And she and I happened to be at a conference at the same time. And we went for a walk one afternoon. And I said, "Do you have any advice for me on this whole empty nest thing?" I said, "I don't know what I'm doing." And she looked back at me and said, "Well, I don't really know what I'm doing either." And we laughed, and we realized in that moment that there aren't a lot of instructions out there for moms when they move into the empty nest and their kids leave home. So we looked at each other and said, well, maybe we need to do some work in this area. Maybe we can figure out how to do it and then share what we've learned with other women.
You know, it's interesting. Both of you had an ideal, going to college, meeting your husband to be, having a family. That became pretty clear to you, didn't it?
It did. Well, we both had similar dreams. We both had very similar dreams and common values, as Barbara said. And you know, it's interesting because when you're starting out in marriage, there are many books written on parenting. There are many books written on raising toddlers. There are books written on raising teenagers. But then you get to that empty nest, and what Barbara and I discovered is there was nothing out there. We didn't have any directions as how to navigate this season. And that was something we wanted, and we also wanted to be able to share with others approaching or yet even already in the empty nest, because it's a bit of an ambiguous season in life. It's like Jello. There's, you sort of think you get it in a mold and then it leaks out. Other seasons, like toddlers, have a clear beginning and an ending, but the empty nest really doesn't. It goes on and on.
Do you think that we become ill-equipped because in this vision which is implanted in us in our youth, you grow up in a healthy family, mom says to you when you grow up you're going to have a family, you play with dolls, your boy grows up and he's thinking about he's going to be a football player and he's going to get married, and you have all this planned out, even to the point where you go to a financial planner. You set up an IRA, a 401k, a 529 plan for your college kids. All of that is chronicled, detailed, and laid out for you, even in your youth. As family gatherings, this is what it's going to look like when you have your family. These are the traditions that you're going to carry on when you have your family. But do we do a disservice, a lack of preparation by not saying that we talk about retirement planning, but guess what? In retirement, your children aren't supposed to be living at home.
Yeah, that's right. Well, Susan and I and our husbands both have made commitments since we were college students or even before, that we were going to walk with Christ. And so as Dennis and I approached this season in our life, just as we did the years when we were raising children, we looked at it and said, okay, God, what do you have for us? What is your plan for us? What do you want for us to do in this season of our life? And to me, the real key is, as couples, regardless of whether or not you have sort of some things that are predetermined, the goal for us as Christ followers is to listen to him and to follow his plan. And that's one of the things that's interesting about the empty nest, is the empty nest gives a couple, a husband and a wife, the opportunity to once again be just a duo and to figure out what God might have for them in the empty nest season, because as we've discovered, many couples have many years ahead of them after their children leave home. And as you said, hopefully they leave and they stay gone. Some kids boomerang back. But one of the things that we've learned is that it's a great opportunity for a husband and a wife to renew their marriage relationship and then to discover something that God would have them do together as a couple, some kind of a new mission, because many of us will have 20, 30, and perhaps even 40 years of ministry ahead, of service in the community, of making a difference in people's lives after the kids leave home.
When should a family begin thinking about when the kids leave home?
Boy, that's a great question. I think it's important to start thinking about it when your last children are sophomores, juniors, and seniors in high school, and particularly for the woman, because one of the things that is the most difficult that Barbara and I have discovered for the woman is a feeling of loneliness. That last child leaves, and you're feeling lonely, and you also feel a great sense of a loss of identity. Whether you work part-time outside the home or full-time outside the home, or are a full-time mom in the home, everyone that we interviewed had this sense of, my main purpose in life has just walked out the door.
Right.
So we wanted to speak to the emotional feeling of loneliness, which most empty nesters experience, and yet they think they're the only one that feels like that. So how do we deal with that? That's a question we tackle at the very beginning of the book.
Have we, in our thought of raising a family, missed part of God's message to us that we are not raising children to stay? We are raising children to leave. That's we see the picture in nature of the mother eagle. The eaglets are now where she has determined are ready to leave the nest. But because they're comfortable, they're well fed, they are enjoying relationship with mom, she has to begin the process of dismantling the nest in order to make it too uncomfortable for them to stay. Is that, and should that be part of our design and part of our purpose? Is early on have a clarity of understanding of parenting is the preparation for them to leave.
Yeah, Susan and I would agree with that part of our goal in raising children is to release them. And that's really clear in the Psalms where it says, like arrows in the hand of a warrior, so are the children of one youth. And arrows were designed to be put into flight. They were designed to leave the bow and fly toward a target. And so one of our goals, and I know it was true with John and Susan, was to raise our children to be independent, to be self-sufficient, and to, when they leave, they understood that we were launching them toward the path that God had for them. And we talk about in the book that parents have a tendency to either be hands-off or to be helicopter parents. And hands-off parents are parents that aren't involved enough and give their kids too much freedom. And helicopter parents are those that hover and are too involved. And so it's really our responsibility as mom and dad to train our children to leave, and then when they leave, to give them the right balance of engagement where we are still giving them some coaching, especially if they're in a college season, which is somewhat transitional to full adulthood. And so we talk about that in the book too. How do you release your kids to adulthood in a way that they can function, or as you say, fly on their own and not fall or not come back. So that is a tension that a lot of empty nest couples are dealing with in this day.
The two of you reached out to each other for support during this season of transition of facing empty nest. Is this something that now is also going to fall into the category of this is what the moms are going to be charged with? The dads are empty nesters too.
It's really a both. It's a both and. In many ways, the moms feel it more, but it impacts dads too, and it can impact them very differently. One of the things that I had to realize was how this would impact my marriage. And I realized that I could fall into one of two traps. On one extreme, I could expect my husband, John, to meet the emotional needs that were now greater because my child had just walked out the door. I would expect him to fill that emotional gap. And that wasn't fair. On the other hand, I could think in my head, well, he'll just work longer and harder hours, and I'll just get on with my career, and we'll connect whenever we can. And that can begin to lead to a subtle isolation. So I think the key word here is we need to be intentional in our marriages and intentional in how we are going to view this new season. One of the things that we did was we went away when our last child left for a little vacation. And during that vacation, we went to a church and we renewed our marriage vows, as if to put a stake in the ground and as if to say, this is the beginning of the rest of our life. We are excited about our life and we want to recommit our marriage to each other.
When we look at the definition of mom and what we begin to impart to young girls and to rising teens and to college, we don't tell them that there's the other side of mom, and that is the leaving, the parting, the moving on part. When you face this together, does this create a new paradigm for premarital counseling? Does this create a new paradigm for marriage encounters at a different level? Most of the marriage encounters out there are about renewing, refreshing, revitalizing, revamping, romanticizing, putting the spark back in the marriage. Should there be a component piece of this that says you two need to have unity in your vision of the empty nest, even to the point of, do you sell the larger house? Do you downsize? Do you downsize in one place so you can afford a second home in another place that you enjoy? And begin to develop that plan that is more inclusive of a life cycle. We're living longer.
Right. I think probably speaking to pre-married couples about this is too soon. I don't think they would have ears to hear, quite honestly.
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
But I do think that beginning to look at this farther into the marriage, farther into the parenting cycle, is a good idea, and that's a part of why we hope that women, especially because they're the ones that are more likely to buy this book, that they would begin to think about it as the youngest one is entering college. And I think it's a great time for the conversation to begin with husband and wife, because it is a transition time in your marriage. You're transitioning from full-time parenting back into it just being the two of you. And there are so many conversations that you have to have as a couple, including, are we going to stay in this house after our kids are gone? Do we want to keep it because this is where all the memories are? What do we want to do with our lives? How long will both of us, will our jobs last if we both are in careers? Or what will I do if I'm a woman and I don't have a career, but how long will my husband keep working? There are just a whole host of conversations that couples need to have, husbands and wives need to have, and ideally they should start having those conversations long before they reach the empty nest. The problem is that most couples are so busy with life, so busy with their children, that they often don't think to do that until it's staring them in the face. Excuse me, and the youngest one is about to walk out the door. That's just the reality of life today with busy families and busy kids too. But I agree, there would be great value in doing that, and we hope that that the book we've written will encourage women to have those conversations with their husbands and to plan ahead.
So much of our identities are wrapped up in the parenting process, then the grandparenting process, that we tend to look at family and family focused as being the primary focus throughout the course of our lives. And that kind of discounts, in a way, that our children's family, their spouse, their children, will be the primary focus of their lives. And so there is a meshing, there is an interaction, there's also an additional distancing, and it becomes a balancing act that it almost has to be, not only do you and your spouse need to have certain expectations for empty nest, but it also opens up the door to establishing parameters or boundaries or expectations for your children as to what mom and dad are going to be doing after the kids leave home.
One of the most important things for parents to realize is that when your children leave home and get married, your relationship with them changes, because no longer is mom or dad the primary go-to person in the relationship. Our goal then is to push our children towards their spouse. Our goal is to encourage them and be cheerleaders for them in order that they might build a strong marriage. And that means that you have to emotionally cut the umbilical cord. As you know, in Genesis it says that a man is to leave, cleave, and become one flesh with his spouse. And so often we parents can hinder the emotional leaving if we don't let them leave. Mm-hmm. And so the question quickly becomes, well, what does that look like? Well, what that might look like is your daughter's just gotten married, and she and her husband are trying to figure out if they should buy a car. And so her first go-to person is you. She calls and says, Mom, what kind of car do you think we should get? Or Dad, what should we get? Your response needs to be, what does your husband say? We are happy to give advice, but we are not the primary one in the relationship. Our goal is always to be pushing them towards one another and not doing anything to come in between the two of them. And that can be really, really hard for some people. It can be particularly hard for women who have been tied to their sons in an unhealthy way.
We've been talking to Barbara Rainey and Susan Yates, co-authors of The Guide to the Empty Nest, Discovering New Purpose, Passion, and Your Next Great Adventure. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, I'm going to ask Barbara and Susan if you don't prepare yourself for this, will you come face to face with an identity crisis? And is that really at the heart of some of the challenges and the issues surrounding the empty nest syndrome? We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only two ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our one-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Barbara Rainey and Susan Yates, who have published a book called The Guide to the Empty Nest, Discovering New Purpose, Passion, and Your Next Great Adventure. Barbara and Susan, welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
We were talking before we went to break that this is somewhat of a identity shift, even almost an identity crisis. That if you're not prepared for this empty nest, you wake up one day, you start your day in your old routine, and you come down the stairs, and there is nobody waiting for breakfast. There is nobody waiting to be put on the bus. There is nobody there. And you look around and your world has changed. And maybe your husband is still going to work. Maybe he's already left and that's his routine. And his routine is not necessarily as directly impacted as your routine is. Is this somewhat of an identity crisis for you? And how do you work through this and engage your husband in it, where men don't speak the same language, as you both well know? So your empty nest struggle, by definition of what your role used to be, his role may only minorly change if he's still going to work. Your role has majorly changed because you're in the midst of a whole new world. How do you, and how in the book do you help us navigate that water?
Yeah, I think both of us can speak to that because we both felt that. And I'll start real quickly and let Susan jump in because I think we both have things to say on that. But in a nutshell, yes, you're absolutely right. Many women do come down the stairs or into the kitchen, and there is an identity crisis. We talked to a really good friend of ours who actually thought she was doing a good job preparing for the empty nest. She started filling up her calendar with Bible studies and with activities and different things, and she woke up one day, the end of October, and she just was all of a sudden overwhelmed with the loneliness and the emptiness. And she said, I just broke down and cried. And she said, I was so unprepared for that because she said, I thought I was doing the right thing by filling my calendar with all these activities. And she said, I was so taken back by the fact that I woke up and just was dissolved in a puddle of tears. And she said what she realized is that she didn't fully anticipate that this was going to be a significant loss for her. And that's one of the lessons that we've all learned, all of us women, is that when our children leave, it's not just a transition for them into a new lifestyle, a career, military, whatever they choose to go do. It's also a transition of identity for us as moms and as dads. And whereas our identity, especially as women, and we talk about this a lot in the book, is circles around what our kids are doing and their activities, and we're constantly speaking into their lives. We're raising them so that they can become good adults when they walk out the door. But that affects us because our identity was wrapped up in that job. And when the children leave, that job is over. And so therefore that's a loss. And a lot of us women fail to anticipate that loss. We fail to allow ourselves time to grieve and to adjust and to make that transition to a different kind of life with our husband.
You know, I would just add to that. I agree with Barbara completely. And the fact that we also need to consider is our marital relationship, as you mentioned a few minutes ago.
Agree.
Because we're going to look at it differently. And there's 3 questions that need to be asked. First, under the umbrella of being intentional in having a conversation with your husband, you need to ask each other, and you need to give one another time to think about it. What are your fears of the empty nest season? What are you excited about in the empty nest season? And then the third one is, what would we like to do that's new, that's exciting, and that might make a difference for good in our world today? So what you're wanting to do in terms of your marriage is be very honest. And you may be really surprised at what your mate says his fears are or what he's excited about. But then you also want to move to the next phase, which is, what is the vision, the next vision that God might have for us as a couple? And that can be very exciting. But the key here is to have this conversation. And it will probably be more than one conversation. You need to begin with one and then plan to continue it. And I would suggest you do this before the last child leaves. You know, begin this conversation right now if you have a junior or senior in high school, so you can begin to dream together, but also stay on the same page in your communication.
I agree with Susan, because what we've also discovered is that men respond differently. Some men were very engaged with their kids doing a pancake breakfast every Saturday morning, or coaching teams, or whatever. And a lot of men have a bigger adjustment because of their involvement with their children. And so we have to give each other grace as we each figure out what is our adjustment going to be, how do we each feel. And as Susan said, we have to have those conversations. Dennis and I had many conversations as we navigated this transition for both of us. We talked about our dreams, we talked about our fears, we talked about what we wanted to do. And that's not usually a one-time conversation. So I couldn't agree more with what she said about having multiple conversations. You have to talk your way through it and discover who we have become over those years of parenting, because we're 2 very different people as we begin the empty nest than we were when we were just the 2 of us before we had kids.
The couples that are out there today who have stayed together, and you know who they are, the marriage was rough, but they stayed together for the kids. And now the season of empty nest is coming into focus. If I were to give that couple a copy of Barbara and Susan's guide to the empty nest, would there be a possibility of restoration? Would there be the possibility of opening up lines of communication about a future that during this rough and rocky marriage of staying together just for the sake of the kids now gives a new vision to a new season that may be the key to restoring a marriage?
You know, it's never too late to do what's right. And that's what's so wonderful about God, is we have a God who is a God of redemption. And we can always make a fresh start. So I would say to that couple who has perhaps struggled to see this as a fresh start, to get marriage counseling, to begin to move into a season of almost like you're getting married again. And yes, it will be exhausting. There may be issues you need to deal with. But this is where hope comes in, and this is where the power of God comes in. It's never too late to do what's right. And the reality is, it is important not only for you as a couple, but it's important for your kids, because they still, even though they've left the home, they still need the security of a mom and dad who love one another. And they also need to see a mom and dad who are willing to work to make their relationship go deeper. Because, no matter where we are in our own marriages, and particularly for those who've had a struggle in their marriage, what they long for more than anyone else is for their children to have solid marriages. And one of the ways to help our children begin to grasp how they can have a solid marriage is for them to see their mom and dad working to improve their marriage their entire life, whether they're 50 or 70. It thrills kids to see mom and dad investing in their own marriage. And I'll just put a little plug in here, because I'm not on Family Life staff, but my husband and I have had the privilege of speaking at the Family Life marriage conferences for 20 years. And they are a wonderful way to invest in your marriage, whether you are newlywed or whether you've been married 40 years. The conferences are relevant, they're practical, they're funny, and they're applicable to anyone of any faith. It's a tremendous way to say, let's go to a weekend to remember Family Life Conference as we enter the empty nest and sort of re-up on our marriage.
Well, you've touched on a subject that's almost an unknown area. You're blazing a trail into an area of marriage that, as we look at this baby boomer generation that's facing the empty nest, looking towards how their plans, their goals, their aspirations, their desires are playing out in front of them, have they actually addressed these issues? For the couple that finds that they've settled into a particular groove, if you will, I would say that this conversation would certainly freshen up and create an entirely new dynamic and new vision as you face the realities of this new life which is waiting for you ahead. It sounds like you've discovered that in your own situation where you were facing this empty nest, do we call it the empty nest syndrome? I think that's a common reference, that there is a common response, that we are defined, as men are defined by what they do, women too define themselves by motherhood, by their role in the family. And when the role is no longer, it's almost as if the play has closed. The run was a great 27-year run on Broadway, but tonight's closing night. And we'll have the closing night celebration, but tomorrow the curtain will not go up, and life as we knew it has come to an end. Scripture tells us that without a vision, the people perish.
That's right.
Does this become a part of that new vision that couples need to start to embrace? I don't know what the numbers are, but statistically, we're looking at the largest generation, the baby boomers, the largest generation coming into this season of empty nest. This has got to be something that people are struggling with and facing. I was particularly impressed by the questions at the end of the chapter, that there are discussion sessions, that you've created it to be a work that's to be used in a group setting.
That's right.
And then the next step would be, as you have become the generation of mentors and the younger women are looking to you, you then help to influence what others influenced in you, which might have been the early expectations of marriage. What's the first year of marriage really like? what's the first year, what's the first child really like? I know this story, and everything's perfect and wonderful, but my house, it's not that way. Well, it's probably not that way in anybody's houses. It's just just the picture that they paint. So you've come across something that is truly needed, but you bring a dimension to it. Now, it took you about 2 years to write this book. And during these 2 years that you were writing the book, were you going through the trial and error? Were you applying these principles into your own situations? And if you were, how were they working out?
Well, I think we were. I think we were both applying what we were learning. And one of the hopes for the book, as you mentioned the questions at the end of each chapter, is that reading through this will help women and men identify what they're feeling, what they're thinking. It will give them a vocabulary for conversation for women with other women if they want to form a book club, or if they just want to meet with one friend for coffee and talk about this, or for husbands and wives to have this common vocabulary as they talk about the questions together. Oftentimes when we're in a transition, we kind of don't know what we feel. When we're going through loss, we're not sure how to name it or exactly what we're feeling or what we're facing. It's hard to communicate those things sometimes in marriage. And I think reading the book, going through the questions, thinking about those things will help you as a couple communicate your experience. This is really what I'm feeling. Listen to this paragraph and read it to one another. Talk about the questions together. But it also should work really well for groups of women to do the same thing. It was very helpful for me to be forced to articulate what is it that I'm really feeling. And what is it that I'm experiencing? And we talked about it together, Susan and I did, but I also shared a lot of those thoughts in my self-discovery with my husband, which helped him understand me better too. So I think the whole purpose of our book can be summed up in helping us in this transition that everyone goes through. And as Susan said, this can be a great time to strengthen your marriage, and the future can be much better than the past if we become intentional and we invest in our relationships.
One of the things that we wanted to do when we wrote the book was make it easy to use. So in the back of the book, we have a 4-session book club. So we would encourage women, as it's the end of the year and graduations are occurring and children are getting ready to go off, to form a book club, to invite some other women in the same season, and to use, it's all laid out for you. So it's very easy to use a 4-session over the summer to meet 4 times and study the book together. Because again, just like Barbara said, we need a vocabulary for expressing what we're going through. But also, I just want to say that the book is not a downer. We're very honest. We're very honest about our own weaknesses, our own challenges, our own feelings. But the whole second half of the book is encouraging us to think together about the next great adventure. And we offer a number of resources, personal testing and ideas, parties to celebrate, things to do that help us stimulate one another to think big. As you mentioned, we are a huge generation, and we can make a positive difference in the world today. And so we want to encourage one another to do that.
You two sound like you both have great husbands, open to all kinds of discussions, or is that just the outcropping because you did such a good job of getting them to the point of buying into this concept of life in the empty nest?
That's a great question. We do have great husbands, but we do not have perfect husbands.
That's right, we do not.
No husband is perfect and no wife is perfect. We're a combination.
And no marriage is perfect.
Right. We're a combination of two selfish, self-centered people united by marriage. And so we rub each other in wrong ways. We encourage each other in good ways. So this is not a book of pretense. This is a book of raw honesty, and yet it's a book full of hope. And yes, we are very grateful to have the husbands that we do. They make us laugh, which is crucial in marriage.
Of the activities that you two tried out to come up with a list of activities that you can recommend, I'm sure you tried some that were successful and some that were not. For you individually, what did you find became your favorite? The one thing that that's at the top of your list in this empty nest season that you actually look forward to with much anticipation as you do this with your husband?
Well, I'll start and say that for me personally, the best thing that I did that we talk about doing in the book is I gave myself permission to take a break for a while. I gave myself permission to have a sort of sabbatical, or you could call it a time off, rather than my last one leaving and jumping into a whole host of activities or making decisions to be involved in a bunch of different things. I personally wanted to have some time off, partly because it's my personality to be more contemplative, but also because I just felt like I would make better decisions if I took some time after our youngest one left home in the fall and didn't jump into a whole bunch of things, a whole bunch of to-dos, and instead I just sort of took a break. I took some time off. Now that doesn't mean that I did nothing, because there were things that I did.
Right.
But I said no a lot more, and I read books. I took a couple of personal assessments to sort of take another look at myself. What are my strengths? What are my gifts? And I prayed a lot, and I asked God, what is it that you have for me in the next season of my life? So for me, that was my favorite experience. We talk about it in the book, and it's one of my strongest recommendations is for women, especially who can do this, to take off or to sort of take a break for a month, take a break for a weekend, take a break for a week, or whatever fits your schedule and your routine, so that you can pull away, spend some time with God, and say, okay, I'm ready for this next season. What do you have for me?
Well, it's a great answer and much appreciated. What about you, Susan?
Well, I learned from Barbara because I didn't do it. And Barbara is much better at boundaries and taking time for herself. I just rushed right headlong into the next thing. And that was a real mistake because I almost burned out. So I have had to learn, and I think the older I've gotten, the more I long for that those quiet hunks of contemplative time. But so I would really say take Barbara's advice and not my example, because she did it right.
Well, it's I can see why the two of you wrote this together. The dynamic is excellent. There's a great deal of camaraderie, a great deal of transparency and openness in this, and that's also found throughout the book. As you said, the book's not a downer. No, in no way is it a downer. It is a reality check into a reality that most people don't know exists until they're in that reality.
That's right.
They don't know that they're even in the water, let alone they're drowning. So you have created a lifeline and a safety net for them to prepare them, to try it on for size, to anticipate and prepare themselves to enthusiastically embrace the season which is going to come, because it is a season. And God gives us seasons, and He gives them to us for our benefit and for our welfare. And this takes the subject of the empty nest and puts it in a godly perspective that says this is a season to embrace. It's as important as all the other seasons of your life and should be as intentional as how you prepared for the upbringing, the education, the care and feeding, the raising, the sending out. You should be just as intentional in this phase of your life as you've been in all other phases. And I thank you and appreciate what you've done, this contribution. Again, the book is called Barbara and Susan's Guide to the Empty Nest by Barbara, Rainey, and Susan Yates, Discovering New Purpose, Passion, and Your Next Great Adventure. And your next great adventure is when the kids leave home. Barbara and Susan, you've been a delight. Thank you so much for being with us here on Revealing the Truth. We wish you great success with the book. We thank our good friends over at Baker Publishing and Bethany House for sending you to us. It was just a real joy to have you with us. We hope to see you again, and thank you for sharing this with us here on Revealing the Truth.
Thanks for having
Thank you.
us.
Quite welcome. And so the time has come, as it does each day at this hour, that brings an end to our live broadcast day. However, that doesn't end our day, for as soon as we shut down the live portion, we'll begin rebroadcasting all four of today's segments right here on www.ianbn.com. You'll also be able to watch it on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and every other possible social media feed known to man. So these interviews and more, don't forget to visit the ignitinganation.com website. Click on Books and Media, and there you can get your copy of this book and all of the books that we have talked about on today and all of our programs. We encourage you to follow all of our authors that we interview on social media. You've just gotten a glimpse of just a little bit of what they have to say, but they have so much more. Many of them have newsletters, blogs, Facebook pages, Twitter feeds. We encourage you to continue to follow them and build a relationship as a resource for you as you navigate this thing called life. So until we see you right back here at 9 o'clock a.m. Central Standard Time, right here at the Igniting Nation Broadcasting Network, until we see you here on Revealing the Truth, we bid you shalom.